Okay, guys, so let's go ahead and let's do some of the pictures that we missed at yesterday's lecture. So where we started yesterday's lecture was just kind of talking about the thoracic cage, the manubrium, sternum, and how the ribs attach into the sternum. So what we'll do is the first picture we're going to do is going to be thoracic cage. Now, as we remember, at the very top of the sternum, we're going to have this very small kind of home plate shaped bone called manubrium. Okay, so this is going to be my manubrium. Distal to that is going to be a large, solid piece. It's going to be my sternum. And then at the very bottom here is going to be my xiphoid process. So if you remember from yesterday, we kind of talked about there's three different types of ribs, right? So I can have a true rib, I can have a false rib, and I can have a floating rib. So a true rib is going to be really where we see one solid rib going into one solid connection. So the way we're going to draw that, these are basically going to be like my top 7 ribs. The way we have this is that I have a solid rib going into one connection or one articulation into sternum, a little bit into manubrium if you're that first or second rib. So remember also that the bone itself is not going to articulate into the manubrium or sternum. What I'm going to have is I'm going to have a little bit of costal cartilage. Okay, so this little bit of costal cartilage is really where that connection articulation is going to happen. So that's going to be my true rib. Remember, I'm going to have one rib going into one articulation. A false rib is where I'm going to have several ribs going into one articulation. And really where we see that is we're going to see that lower down in the rib cage. Okay, so my floating ribs, my false ribs, my false rib is going to be a little lower down in the rib cage. And basically what I'm going to see here is I'm going to see several ribs and they're all going to have one big attachment via a common costal cartilage. So I'm going to see a big piece of costal cartilage come here, and then I'm going to see all these pieces of costal cartilage kind of merge into one big piece of costal cartilage, which then is going to attach into the sternum and the distal portion of the sternum. So this being sternum. So this is where I'm going to see a false rib. So I'm going to have several ribs with each of their own costal cartilages merging into one large piece of costal cartilage attaching into the sternum. Now, the floating rib is going to be very easy because remember what a floating rib is going to be. So a floating rib, I'm basically going to see this at 12th rib. Means that there's going to be no articulation at the sternum. Okay, so that's going to be my definition of a floating in the rib. Okay, so that was the big first drawing that we did. Second big drawing that we did some stuff with the pericardial sac. Now remember with the pericardial sac, pericardium itself is going to be innervated by the phrenic nerve. That phrenic nerve is going to have root levels C3, 4, and 5. Now remember, the pericardium is going to be that surrounding tissue around the heart. Okay, and remember that the pericardium is going to have a couple different layers. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. We're going to have a really hard fibrous layer, and we're also going to have a serous layer, and then we have a super duper thin visceral layer. Now the fibrous layer is going to be really tough, and it's going to attach in the diaphragm. The serous layer is going to have basically the capability to make a lot of serous fluid or serum. And we talked about serum yesterday. So this is going to be my fluid making layer. And the visceral layer is going to be super thin. So those are the levels of my pericardium. And we kind of jumped into it a little bit after this section, and we jumped into those different layers. Remember that the serous layer is going to be that big double-walled layer where the heart kind of pushes into the serous layer. So you definitely need to remember what layers we're dealing with the pericardium. In fact, when you have the opportunity, make sure you get into Cadaver Lab, because there's a couple nicely done dissections where you can actually see the different layers of pericardium. So definitely make sure that you're taking a look at that. All right, so from there, I actually wanted to add a couple additional drawings, okay? And these are going to be drawings that we may not have time to get to in lecture, but I definitely want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to view them, and maybe we'll clear up some of the material that we have in the Grace textbook, which I understand the Grace textbook it's a massive, massive textbook. All right, so the next thing I really want to draw out is going to be the lungs. Okay, so with the lungs are pretty simple, to be quite honest with you, in terms of just their anatomy. Now, like I said, we're going to have another course called cardiopulmonary. Our second-year students are actually taking it right now. With the lungs, what we have to kind of remember is that our right lung is going to be just a little different than our left lung. Okay, in that we're going to have a couple key components here. Okay, so what we're going to have is we're going to have our right lung over here. Okay, so this is going to be my right lung. And then I'm going to have a left lung. Now, left lung is going to have a couple key features to it that we really have to recognize and understand. One is this little area right here. That little area right there is going to be called cardiac compression. And that cardiac compression is important because it really is going to give us a good idea of which is the left lung. So cardiac compression is one of those things, it says what it is what it says, right? That's where the heart kind of pushes up against the lung and leaves a little bit of an impression. But if you ever get mixed up and it's like, okay, am I looking at a right lung versus left lung? Definitely take a look and try to find that cardiac compression. It's a really good landmark. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to draw on the trachea. Okay, and trachea is pretty simple, and we'll do another drawing of the trachea here very, very shortly. Okay, my trachea is going to kind of come down. Remember, it's going to enter the lungs, and that's going to be my main pipe, if you will, to get oxygen into my lungs. Okay, so that's going to be my trachea. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to draw in the diaphragm. Okay, and the diaphragm is going to be distal. And we're going to draw a diaphragm in its relaxed state. And that relaxed state is going to be a little bit of an umbrella or an arch, if you will. So this is my diaphragm. And then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to draw in our different lobes. Now, the interesting thing here is that my right lung is going to have more lobes than my left lung. Okay, makes it pretty easy. So what we're going to have is we're going to have these little fissures. Okay, these little fissures just mean these little separations, and you guys can really see this in lab. It's actually really nice. So what we're going to have here is this guy here is going to be my right horizontal fissure, right horizontal fissure. And then this more obliquely oriented fissure is called exactly that. This is the oblique fissure. What that's going to do is that's going to actually differentiate my right superior lobe, my right middle lobe, and my right inferior lobe. Okay, so the way this is going to work is up here, this is going to be my right superior lobe. This is going to be my right middle lobe. And this is going to be my right inferior lobe. Okay? So that's basically the very cursory, very superficial view of the right lung. Left lung is going to only have one of these fissures. Okay, so what the left lung is going to have, it's going to have an oblique fissure. Kind of comes around this way. So this is going to be my left oblique fissure. And what my left oblique fissure is going to do is it's going to differentiate my two lobes of my left lung. It's going to be my left superior lobe, my left inferior lobe. Like I said, from a very superficial, cursory standpoint, that's kind of how my lungs are set up. So from there, what I really want you to do is take a look at Ray's textbook. Like I said, there's going to be more in terms of lung anatomy. There's going to be more in terms of lung landmarks. But from a very cursory, superficial standpoint, this is what I want you to look at. Okay? So from there, what I want to do is I want to kind of get into the trachea a little bit. And just from a very easy standpoint, just kind of understand how the trachea is made. Okay, now remember the trachea is going to be lined with some cartilage, and it's going to be lined with some smooth muscle. Okay, and that's very important to remember because the trachea itself is going to be just one big tube of sequential muscles. Okay, so what I want you to think about here, we're going to do the trachea next. And we're going to do kind of a cut version. Okay, so to give you an orientation, this is my trachea. And I cut it like that. We're going to open it up and we're going to look straight down the trachea. And basically what we're going to see in a cross section is a couple different things. Okay, so first thing we're going to see is we're going to see a lumen. Okay, and lumen just means opening. Okay, So this very middle section, I'm actually going to color it in here just to differentiate it from the rest. That's going to be the lumen. And from there, what we're going to see is we're actually going to see some hyaline cartilage that's going to kind of look like this. So it's going to kind of come up and around. But what we're going to see is the hyaline cartilage is not going to completely surround the trachea. Okay, so I'm going to color that in as well. So that way, like I said, it's a little easier to see, a little more, I'm not going to say visually pleasing, because none of my drawings are visually pleasing. But at the same time, less bad, let's put it that way. Okay, so this is going to be my hyaline cartilage. I spelled hyaline wrong, so I'm going to respell it. There's my hyaline cartilage. Now, from there, what we're going to see is we're actually going to have a little bit of smooth muscle. This is how this trachea is going to expand and contract to let air in and let air out. So this is going to be smooth muscle. So that's basically how the cross-section of my trachea is going to look. Okay, so like I said, very cursory. Now, when it comes to the bronchus, if we actually draw the bronchus in a cross-section, what we're going to see is a much different setup. Okay, we're going to see a much different orientation and a much different relationship between the cartilage and the smooth fiber. Okay, so next one we're going to do is going to be the bronchus. So with the bronchus, what we're going to see, we're going to draw this in cross-section again. We're still going to have that lumen. Okay. So lumen's still going to be there. We'll draw that in orange again. So there's my lumen. And then what we're going to see is we're going to see very small but significant pieces of cartilage that kind of surround the lumen. Kind of like that. And we're going to color those in as well. And not to make the picture too confusing, I'm just going to note one of these. But please understand that all these little sections in this kind of green is going to be, these are all cartilage. From there, we're going to have little bits of smooth muscle that connect and move each of these pieces of cartilage. So this is going to be smooth muscle as well. All right, so hopefully this helps, and we'll do obviously some more drawings in class tomorrow, but I wanted to supplement some of our drawings and obviously redo the ones that weren't shown up on the meeting yesterday.